I'm Jere Kirkpatrick, and I'm teaching the fundamentals of metal shaping. And I'm sitting in Carol Shelby's office, in Carol Shelby's chair. On October 28th and 29th, 2017, which is Halloween weekend, John Forbes from up in Santa Cruz had his annual metalworking get-together, and the demonstrators were Greg Montelier, who showed some of his hydraulic press tooling and explained the lost wax process. Kevin West, who demonstrated proper riveting. Bill Grulich showed us some TIG welding. And bringing up the rear was Ron Covell and myself. Gene Winfield also usually makes this meet, but he was feeling under the weather and couldn't make it this year. On Saturday night after dinner, we all met over at Michael Leeds' shop, and you probably know him for creating Big Bertha. But the main purpose for us all gathering at his shop that night was to view the blown Ranger, which is an award-winning project that he just recently finished. If you stick around later in this video, you'll actually see a blown 12-cylinder Ranger aircraft engine being started. After looking at the raw footage from what was taken there at the meet, I could see that most of the other demonstrators were mainly just talking and answering questions, but Ron Covell and my demos both had quite a bit of activity going on, so Ron and I will be the primary focus in this video. So let's jump off into it. Then there's another one, a little harder. Some people do tipping with the skateboard wheel. What do you use for tipping? Do you use a hard bottom or a soft?
Hard bottom.
Does anybody use a soft bottom for tipping? Ron? You ever use?
I have done it that way, but I prefer the hard.
Okay. That was.
I use steel on the bottom for the tipping I do.
Right. I use either a Cummins piston pin, which is full width. That's the full width of the top shaft, or if I want to use a stop, say I want to be a certain distance from the edge, then I'll use two Lasby's flat dies and then put this in the middle just to get the spacing out. And then I use one of his flame dies for the tipping. And the reason I use that is because of the recess, I can hide the bolt that holds it in. So I can get all the way up 90. And if I want to go a little bit farther than 90, I have this one here that's at a 45. So I can put the piece 45 behind and then come up some more. Okay.
What radius are on those washers approximately?
Two flat washers together, whatever that is, that radius.
Best damn answer.
120 thousandths plus or minus.
I try to keep it within 3 thou with a file.
Yeah.
What I do is put them together and then just make one radius.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I should know this, but I don't know how thick a flat washer is.
Just tell them about that.
I should have looked it up before I came.
They're never the same.
They're
90 or something.
They're 3/4 inch flat washers, gives you about the right size. And then you have to bore them out for the Harbor Freight 7/8. Okay, so we'll see what this one looks like. It's a unbelievably different look just by switching those two around. Your contact point is a little farther out, so you get a little slower slope. Sure. Yeah, slower slope to the outside.
I'll give you a little intro if you like.
Okay.
Sounds good. So if everybody's ready, this is Greg Modelaire. I first got to know Greg when he lived in Watsonville quite a few years ago now, but he and his father were doing extraordinary metalwork at the time. They built complete cars from the ground up. I mean, the bumpers, the hubcaps, the frame, the body, everything. And he also has a great interest in fine art. So Greg, take it away.
Okay, glad to meet everybody. I just brought various different things that might be of use. One is just using the lost wax casting process that these guys are made for parts if you need stuff. This was a water pump that I made for a 1910 Stevens Jere, which had an aluminum pump that just rotted away. But I actually took the original pump and covered it in wax because there's always shrink involved with everything. So it made it just a hair bigger than it originally was. Then make one of these rubber molds off of it. And then you pour wax in here, you slush it with wax and get it about 3/16 or whatever thickness you need. Then that wax comes out and it's invested in a ceramic material. You fire it and the wax comes out, part of the process too. Then you pour bronze in where the wax was and you wind up with an exact copy of what the wax was. And then there's a couple pictures here after you can look at it, where it's just, you do all the machining after the fact. It works.
So there's a weld around each of those sunken areas on the first film, is that right?
This one here?
Yeah.
No, it's just pressed.
I'm amazed that you don't get distortion in the corners.
It's part of it is that having enough press pressure to flatten it out, so when the tool, cancels out, it's actually, you're flattening this back out again. You do quite often wind up some stress that, like he was talking about with the roller, that you have to do. But it's, it's pretty manageable, all things considered. Taking the right amount of material out so you're not pulling the entire amount is real important, especially with limited pressure. And it does cut down on the stress on the metal. This is another example of something that's pretty simple to do. This takes a lot less tonnage. This is a Pope motorcycle tank from 1908, I think, something like that. And the originals were even thinner than this metal, but they have this embossed panel in it. And again, you could do this with a roller or a Pullmax, but it's just neater and cleaner and easier to do it this way, especially if you're going to make more than one. So this is actually the tools for that. This is just 18 gauge or 16 gauge in this case, and you cut the pieces out. And this one, you can actually locate everything since there's no holes with masking tape. You got to be a little careful depending on the tonnage because you can emboss that tape too. But the amount of clearance between the two parts will determine the radius that you get here. So that's what you have to watch. If it has to be really tight, they have to be closer together. It also takes more tonnage. The further they are away from the edge, then it's just a simple bend as opposed to actually really forcing the metal. But pretty straightforward and easy to do aside from the time.
So this happens to be, and because most of the people who do riveting for real build airplanes or military airplanes, there's military standards for this. We want to make sure that the planes don't fall apart in the air, so we built the standard for this. This one happened, this head style in military lingo is called a 470. It's a universal head. What you can almost see here is there's a little flat on the top. So you can either drive it with a depression that fits the round part of it, or if you really have to in a pinch, you can use a flat surface to push against it. So called a universal head, can be driven either way. And then the countersunk. Now, these tools are relatively expensive. I think this one's in the $50-ish range. The smaller one, which I don't see, is...
How far will that open up?
Yeah, it could open up a lot further, and I hate it when people come up and grab it, just yank it, because you hardly ever use it more than like this.
Right,
So,
since the
yeah, I mean,
4 to
because-
5 is your
yeah.
max.
Yeah, so when you look at placing up against the actual part here, if we get my spacing, we've barely opened it at all. So theoretically, you could go really huge distances if you didn't want to use the aircraft spacing. But if you want to use aircraft spacing, this is about as big as it gets.
Something I don't. So, my topic today is going to be improving your welding. I'll be here. I'll try to give you some tips that I learned this last year, and which really improved my welding. And I thought I was doing pretty good for a while, but
He showed some press forms that were made to create really sharp angular steps in metal. You can do something similar, although not to the same depth, using an English wheel. And the process is fairly simple in concept. You just take a piece of metal and cut it in half so the two pieces fit together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And then you can see I have alignment holes on both of these pieces. And I have a matching piece of metal with holes drilled that align with the holes on this part. And it's set up so that the female part goes on the bottom and the male part goes on the top. And working in this way, we'll use the wheel to squeeze all along these edges, and you'll see that's going to emboss a very nice detail in the part. The male goes on the top, backwards. So I'm going to use those temporary fasteners to hold all these parts together.
What happens if you don't file it? Did you get a different result on it when you don't file the edges? Or you didn't?
If I draw pictures on the board, how many people can see it? I guess most of you can.
Yeah.
So let me tell you what's going on with that.
It's over here by the,
So if you take a piece of metal and cut it, whatever you cut it with leaves a curve of some width, and for most types of cutters, it's about a 1/16 of an inch or less. So if you don't do anything, if you just cut the metal and use the pieces as is, and you're shaping a piece of metal that's 60 thousandths of an inch thick, the same thickness as the curve, what these try and do is to form the metal like that. And it isn't very easy for sheet metal to form really sharp curves like that. So you probably wouldn't be able to press it all the way together. So what I did was to soften these edges a little bit, like that. And when you soften the edges like that, you get more of a shape like this in the part you're forming. And going the other direction, if you machine two parts so they fit together with no gap, if you press them together, it would shear the metal. so you can get whatever result you want. And my pattern doesn't really matter, just so long as the center of the wheel touches every spot on the profile of the shape I'm making. So let's start at the tip. I don't have any pressure at all. So I'm going to start moving this one spoke increment. So we have very, very light pressure here. Just make sure I've run over everything. We'll move it up one more spoke increment.
You have a dead flat wheel on the bottom.
The bottom wheel has a slight contour, and I prefer using a contoured wheel rather than a flat wheel. With the flat wheel, the edges sometimes do damage the edges of the wheel, so I prefer using a wheel with some crown to it.
You're just slowly tightening up the pressure.
Yes, I am. And it doesn't matter too much whether you pull the metal or push it. It works either way. So I believe this is going to be our last pass.
How it might feel.
It's more of a look of it. I'm looking to see how deeply these plates have embossed themselves into the metal. I can get a little peek at it here to see how it's coming. Gloves off. So I'll pass around the female part of this form first so you all can take a look at that. This is 80 thousandths aluminum I used. If I was going to do a lot of parts, it would be better to make these out of steel, but for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parts, aluminum works fine. And you can see that I got some pretty nice definition with that. So everybody knows you can do this with a bead roller as well, freehand. But if you need to make a number of these and you want them identical, it would be hard to make them identical with them freehand. So that's a real easy way to emboss a shape into a aluminum sheet.
But a bead roller would only do the profile, not raise the whole middle, or would it?
It would do exactly the same thing.
How thick is that roll?
The part I'm forming is 60 thousandths.
Right.
And
Wouldn't it would round off the points of the flame?
the bead roller?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the type of die you're using. I mean, some dies come to a knife point. They're not used much because they cut the metal.
Yeah.
But the smaller the contact patch, the finer the tip can be that you make. Jere has some dies with about a 1 millimeter flat spot on them, the plain dies. So with dies that narrow, you can get close to this. So that's embossing on the wheel. Most often the English wheel is used to give a compound curve to metal, but there's a completely different technique that can give you a simple curve. And I should explain the difference between them. So a compound curve is like this fender hanging up above your head. So there's some curvature north to south and there's some curvature east to west at the same time. That's a compound curve. If I'm going to use your paper, a simple curve has curvature in one direction, but it's dead flat in the other. So most often English wheel gives you a compound curve, but there's a special way to set it up so it gives you a simple curve. And the way to do that is to cushion the top wheel. And the traditional way to do this is to go to a tire place and get a used inner tube that you can cut a ring out of, like a wedding band, and you slip that ring over the top wheel so you have a thin cushion of rubber on the top wheel. and it only takes about a 1/16 of an inch cushion to make it work great. Well, I went to a couple of different tire stores in Watsonville, and nobody had an inner tube this big. So we're going to do it a different way. I'm going to use a sheet of rubber. Yeah, so I'll just put the sheet of rubber on top of a piece of metal, and you'll see what the result is. So we're going to make a transmission tunnel using an English wheel to curve the metal. So a transmission tunnel, or at least the one I'm making today, is a simple curve. All the curvature is right to left, and it's straight from front to back. So I need to find a kind of a zero pressure setting here. You can see the wheels aren't even touching the rubber at this point, so they're just touching there. Let me go about a quarter of a turn up from there. And the first pass I'm going to make close to this edge here. Let me kind of gauge what the results are from that. Yeah, that's not enough pressure to do anything. Okay, we're getting some action this time. So it may be hard to see, but there's just a little tiny bit of a curl on the metal where I'm trying to over it. And we can repeat this as many times as we need to. So I'm going to go right back to that edge. And this works best for me if I always move in the same direction. In theory, you could go back and forth, but especially by laying this blanket over the metal, and the blanket doesn't really want to stay in place very well, so.
You're trying to keep your passes parallel with each other.
Well, on a square part, they'd be parallel, but my part isn't square. My part is tapered, so it's going to be a fan shape. And you can already see where I'm going with this. So it's putting a very nice curve in the part. Now I can see that this wheel set is leaving a little bit of a ridge right at the edge of each raised area. A lot of English wheels are set up so that the lower wheel has a little flat spot in the center. And I believe that's how these wheels are made, so that will give you a little bit of a ridge at the edge of each pass. But I'm not going to let that slow me down. Looks like I have more curve, way more curve on the second side than on the first side. So I'll go back and see if I can
So that's how the Santa Cruz event went. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.